It's truly fantastic to see such a diverse international audience, which truly reflects our EFACIS community, and to see so many familiar and also new faces. It is my great pleasure and honor to warmly welcome you all to the Multilingual Mermaid, our 7th EFACIS Roundtable Discussion. As most of you know, thanks to our big and vibrant EFACIS community, we at the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies are in the happy situation of being able to initiate, run, and become involved in various exciting Irish studies projects, which are situated at the intersection of culture, research, and third-level education. And I will unashamedly post some links in the chat to our Irish Itinerary podcast, to the new EFACIS Book Club, and to our online journal Rise and our book series ISE during the session. Still, while EFACIS organizes many exciting international projects and events, and currently does again run its very own literature as translation project, which translates selected texts by an Enright into numerous languages. Still, our involvement with the Aistriú project, funded by Galway 2020 and organized by the University of Galway, was certainly one of the absolute highlights in recent years. And I'm truly delighted that thanks to Rióna Ní Dhomhnaill's initiative, one of the outstanding results of the Aistriú project, the Multilingual Mermaid, is launched here today at our EFACIS Roundtable. Professor Rióna Ní Dhomhnaill, our dear colleague and EFACIS board member, Irish Research Council laureate, principal investigator of the exciting research project Republic of Conscience, Human Rights and Modern Irish Poetry, and of course, co-director of Aistrú Crossing Territories, Languages and Art, who chairs this event today, certainly does not need an introduction. So I'll just say thank you so much, Rióna, for organizing this EFACIS Roundtable, and over to you.
Thank you, Katharina. And of course, the real star of tonight is our poet, Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill, and the translators. So tá luchar warm fáilte harróh higan seolú leor seo, agus higan teisiún play a lanhi an seolú. Curum fáiltear leithar nói rih Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill hain atá in our masks the Lochtéisterte. So welcome all. Before I invite Professor Michael Cronin to launch the collection, The Multilingual Mermaid, I'd just like to say a few words about that larger context that Katharina mentioned, the context for this publication. So it arose out of the Aistriú project that was based in Uisce na Gaillimhe in the University of Galway and formed part of Galway's European Capital of Culture programme in 2020. That word Aistriú means to translate or to migrate or to transform. So essentially that project was a call to translators and to artists to translate an Irish language literary text to another language or indeed to another art form. And each of the Irish language texts that we provided dealt with the theme of migration, but from different perspectives. So just to give you a sense of the other outcomes, we had an open call. It was a competitive call and it resulted in 2 artistic commissions. One of them was Arash Arish, or Back Again, by Brew Theatre. And that was an immersive virtual reality theatre piece that was inspired by a text by Martin O'Kine, another text by Pádraig Ó Conradh, and a text by Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill. And that theatre piece has toured the islands of Ireland, the Gaeltachts, and also has been performed at art festivals to great critical acclaim. The second commissioned piece was Leide, and that is, of course, a title of one of Nuala's poems that we will speak about tonight. And it was a collaborative film performance based on new musical compositions by composer Ian Wilson, a performance by poet Chiamaka Eniamadi, and by the One World Voice Choir. They're based in Cuimhne, and that is a migrant support centre. So What might strike you there is the fact that Nuala's work was central and at the heart of those artistic responses, and that happened organically. It was the artists themselves, unprompted, responded to Nuala's texts. And that pattern was also evident in the open call and in the response that we got from translators. So as part of the Aistriú project, and we leaned heavily on the EFACIS network, we received 90 translations into 20 different languages, and all of those translations are available to be read online. And I'll pop the link to the website into the chat. And as I said, we worked with the EFACIS network and with the expertise of Hedwig Schwal to engage translators. And many of those translators gravitated of their own accord towards Nuala's poems about the mermaid. And so that is really where this publication has been born, if you like. So with the support of the poet herself, Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill, and her publisher, Gallery Press, with the wonderful support of Literature Ireland, this collection came into being, and we're extremely grateful to Peter Sir, who acted as the translation editor. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Michael Cronin, who will now launch the collection.
Good morning, Rióna. As sin agus gíam gachra chulagana atá in seo a nacht agus mór ar nói an fila Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill. I want to begin my few words by reference to the late Hilary Mantel. In 1988, she published a novel about the giant O'Brien, an Irishman who was over 8 feet tall and whose body still remains on display despite his express last wishes in a museum in London. In the course of writing this book, Mantel felt as much shadowed by her own personal loss of words as by O'Brien's posthumous lack of dignity. And she said in an interview around the time of the completion of the book, I felt a great sadness about the loss for me of the Irish language. I was aware my mouth was empty. Mantel's choice of image is hardly arbitrary. The empty mouth has neither words nor food, speechlessness, ghosting the bitter silence of famine. And as Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill merfolk know to their cost, negotiating fundamentally altered worlds can severely test our capacity for expression and endurance. It is, of course, the question of loss, what to do with it and how to overcome it, that is a perpetual preoccupation for translators. And you can see this coming out in reflection after reflection after reflection. As these different reflections attest in the Multilingual Mermaid, questions of rhyme, rhythm, cultural reference, register, all of these, if you like, dog the translators as they journey into their respective languages, wondering how much they have left behind and how much they have to make, if you like, anew before landfall in a new tongue. In this respect, the merfolk themselves as amphibian creatures attempting to inhabit dual worlds seem perfectly placed to capture the peculiar disorientation and the strategic survival of translators as they transplant a fully achieved artifact from one language and culture into a radically different interpretive framework of another. The translator, if you like, in a sense, is the multilingual mermaid as she moves between her different language worlds. Reflecting on her Greek translations, Natasha Raimondou argues, by transcribing this underwater nomadic life at a critical distance from inherited traditions in Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill's poetry, I learned to remember flows, storms, surfaces, the silence of the first maternal seabed. This maritime undertow points to a way of seeing translation that breaks with the exhausted metaphors and the kind of happy, clappy universalism of the well-meaning. If one of the more gratifying self-images of the translator is as a bridge builder, the pontifex, from which we get Pope, Pontiff, and so on, it is, I would argue, an image that is deeply problematic, implying, as it does, a kind of a level of disengagement, the imperial view from above, looking down into distant waters. But the merfolk do not have that option. They have been in the water, negotiating the currents, interacting continuously with other forms of life. They want to be immersed, not detached. They need less of the pontifical certainties of monolingual exceptionalism and more of the supple, shifting openness of the fluvial. We can see in the aqueous kind of reworking of the task of the translator in this volume that the translators are caught up in the currents of language and expression, moving from bank to bank, from shore to shore, in a perpetual oscillation between source and target forms of expression. And this is the experience of anyone who's working between languages, the sense that when you move into that other language, you begin to lose sight of the language that you've come from. Then we go back to the language that you've come from, you begin to lose sight of the languages that you've traveled to, and so on. So translators, if you like, are not on the bridge admiring the view below, but down in the waters, experiencing the currents, culturally and linguistically living through what Audrey Robitaille and Daniel Macaulay in their reflection call the pervasive imagery of water. Adaptation, integration, segregation, dislocation, these are indeed contemporary migratory experiences captured in the predicament of the merfolk. These experiences have linguistic consequences as our cities and towns become Babel's suburbs, invested with an unprecedented level of language variety. So on the island of Ireland, the fraught Irish-English binary gives way to dozens of new languages on the island of Ireland, where their speakers must find their own accommodation between the languages of inheritance and those of schooling, employment, and socialization. In this respect, it is wholly appropriate that the multilingual mermaid in this volume speaks not only in the traditional languages of Europe, but also in Arabic, Mandarin, Chinese, and Japanese. The dilemmas of language and cultural dislocation are both intensely local and strikingly global. Our daily realities now are irreversibly and inescapably translational. What we know about humans is that 540 million years ago, we were a bag-like sea creature with a large mouth, and we moved about by wriggling. The merfolk in the poems are reminders of where we started, the origin of the species, our essential animality. At a time when the planet is literally being consumed by the vertical fiction of human superiority, of human supremacism, the Mhúruch are there to remind us of our horizontal relationality, how our very survival as a species depends on a knowing humility, a non-hierarchical relationship with the more than human world. And what is translation if not a continual interrogation of the different species of origin, of the way we deal with or cope with radical difference, of what we do with what has gone before. Indeed, in his translation editor's note, Peter Serre defines translation, and I quote, as the intelligence that comes after the instigating, imaginative event of the original. So as the planet negotiates the conditions of its future viability, the translations in the Multilingual Mermaid, which engage with the hybrid community of the merfolk, are compelling examples of the translational intelligence at work. By interrogating the instigating imaginative event of Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill originals, they explore how we might relate to the radically other, the myriad species with whom we share a world. 36 years ago, and there's no reason why Nuala should remember this, I made my way on a very unpredictable and capricious green rally bicycle to Nuala's house in South Dublin. I was going to interview her for the first issue of the Literary Review Graph. And what I remember from that interview was the way in which, in 1986, she described Ireland as a particularly cold house for an Irish language writer. And if I may quote her, she said to me, part of the creativity is the need to make an impact. You can't say, I don't care. Though some people do it, but I don't think it's sincere. There is no reaction or feedback, just talking into a void and feeling invisible. I have 17 years experience of it, and what does it do to you? It makes you bitter. It gives you a ghetto mentality, which means that you're constantly looking over your shoulder and on the defensive all the time. So this kind of feeling of invisibility that Nuala describes in that interview is often indeed the common lot of translators. But is it precisely and paradoxically the translators who would change things with the advent of the interest in translating Nuala's work, starting in English and spreading to other languages? A change which I think is registered in the rich panoply of languages on display in this volume. The Multilingual Mermaid is in this respect an eloquent tribute to those scholars and translators around the globe, many of whom, of course, are with us this evening, who selflessly and tirelessly bring Irish writing through the good offices of Literature Ireland to the bookshelves of the world. And I'd just like for a moment or to pause to acknowledge the extraordinary work which is done by EFACIS and scholars in other parts of the world. And I stress particularly the non-Anglophone world, because one of my feelings, it's kind of a beef of mine, is that so much of the attention in Ireland is devoted to the sort of the Anglophone diaspora, the particular kind of Anglocentric obsession of the Irish media, and the extraordinary and continuous work that is done by scholars and translators in the Anglophone world really needs far more recognition than I think that is generally given. So this is the one opportunity, if you like, tonight where I would really like to salute the work that is done in Irish studies in the non-Anglophone world. The year 1685 saw the publication of a work on translation by an Irish translator called An Essay on Translated Verse by a man called Wentworth Dillon, who was the Earl of Roscommon. And in it he gives advice to young translators kind of starting off in the profession. And he says, examine how your humor is inclined, and which the ruling passion of your mind. Then seek a poet who your way does bend, and choose an author as you choose a friend. I think the friends in this volume have indeed chosen, and chosen well. The translator's reflections speak repeatedly of a profound admiration for the work and a recognition of the overwhelming relevance of the writing of Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill to both present and future concerns. So it is my particular pleasure and honor to officially launch the Multilingual Mermaid translations in honor of Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill as Riam Gachria an Jauer, agus ja ober na Nashtohori, Sicha na Focail, agus Ceartha na Deangacha. The mouths are no longer empty. They are now speaking up and out in the idioms of the planet, rejecting the legacy of silence and the wounds of indifference. The poems may indeed speak of loss, but in the translations, we read only an incomparable gain for world literature. Gurmi Maigith.
Thank you so much for that very thoughtful and discerning and, can I say, poetic piece that looks so closely at the multilingual mermaid itself, and also, of course, at the process of translation. You know, the imagery was very vivid, and I'm sure we'll return to some of those images and metaphors as we go through tonight's proceedings. So just to let people know how the second half, if you like, of this roundtable session is structured. So it's really centered on the translators themselves, who Michael said have given very generously of their time and talent to translate Nuala's poems into their chosen language or languages. So tonight we're joined by 7 of the 18 translators who contributed to this volume. So we've asked each translator to read one poem and to speak briefly about their experience as a translator and how they approached the process. So just to let you know, there were 4 poems that they could choose from. An Mhúruch an Ospidéal, The Mermaid in the Hospital, Cuimhne an Uisce, A Recovered Memory of Water, Leide, A Tiny Clue, agus an Mhúruch agus Focail Ailbhe, The Mermaid and Certain Words. So, as I said, each translator will just respond and read one of their translations and give a quick description. How we've structured it then is that initially the poet Ailbhe Ní Ghearbhuigh, and I'm very grateful to Nuala's fellow poet Ailbhe, who is here, will read the poem in Irish, followed by the poem read in English, translated by Paul Muldoon, but tonight read by John Caulfield, who is the co-director of the Aistriú project and really the powerhouse, the engine, who has kept us all on our toes. And then followed by a translation and a discussion. Just to let people know, if you have any comments or questions, you can pop them into the chat, and we will have time at the end for some discussion. Presently, we'll hear the Arabic, the German and the Polish translation of An Mhúruch an Ospidéal, The Mermaid in the Hospital, but first Ailbhe Ní Ghearbhuigh will read it in Irish for us.
An Mhúruch an Ospidéal. Chúisig sí, agus ní raibh herbal éisc ann ní sa bhó, ach istigh sa labig lethe bheith an dá rud fada fuairse. Bugóil leat gur gaid mhara iad nó slamací fiole. Mar bhagad tá siad ní flóir, íhan na cud amúire. Tá lena fórna as an meabhar le duch, is an leheile có róthcha de jócanna. Mar sin héin is leor an méid seo. Is the chashi an dá rud amach as a siomra. Ach seo híon chuid ná tuigeann sí. Conas a hit sí féin in a níag, cux an bóhead. Céin bhaint a bhí ag an dá rud lethe, nó céin bhaint a bhí a cé leosan. An bhanaltre a thug an nudde is a chuirí a dro an ólais. Cosí seo atá ceangailte diaid, agus ceann eile chun sohíos fút, cos eile a héan a dó, catha tú fálam chun is siú lo. Ins na míosa fada a lean, nadidir hitte crí, de réir mar hit trocht na cuise a thór sí.
The Mermaid in the Hospital, translated into English by Paul Muldoon. She awoke to find her fishtail clean gone, but in the bed with her were two long, cold thingamies. You'd have thought they were tangles of kelp or collops of ham. They're no doubt taking the piss, it being New Year's Eve. Half the staff legless with drink and the other half playing pranks. Still, this is taking it a bit far. And with that, she hurled the two thingamies out of the room. But here's the thing she still doesn't get. Why she tumbled out after them, arse over tip. How she was connected to those two thingamies and how they were connected to her. It was the sister who gave her the wink and let her know what was what. You have one leg attached to you there and another one underneath that. One leg, two legs, a one and a two. Now you have to learn what they can do. And in the long months that followed, I wonder if her heart fell the way her arches fell, her instep arches.
And now we're going to hear the Arabic translation by Awatif Alshammari and followed by commentary by Asma Alshammari.
استيقظت لتجد أن ذيل الحورية قد اختفى، لكنها هناك في السرير معها. أحست بقطعتين غريبتين باردتين طويلتين، ظنت بأنهما خيوطا متشابكة من خيوط البحر أو قطعا من لحم معجون. إنهم بلا شك مدعاة للسخرية في ليلة تقديم القرابين، ليلة الاحتفال برأس السنة. نصف الموظفين بلا شركاء مع شرابهم، ونصفهم الآخر يضحكون ويمزحون. يأخذها ذلك بعيدا ويدفعها لترمي هذين الشيئين خارج الغرفة وتمشي بهما، لكنهما معا شيئان غريبان. ما زالت لا تفهم لماذا هبطت بعدهم وكيف هي تعلقت بهما وكيف هم اتصلوا بها. كانت أختها من أعطتها إشارة غمزة وأخبرتها بالأمر الذي كان يحصل. لديك ساق متصلة بك هنا وواحدة أخرى تحتها هناك، إن واحدة وإن اثنتان، المهم أن تتعلم الآن كيف تستطيعين استخدامهما. في الأشهر الطويلة اللاحقة أتساءل إذا سقط قلبها بالطريقة نفسها التي سقطت بها أقواسها، أقواس مشط رجليها.
The Mermaid and Certain Words. حرية البحر وبعض كلمات. مهما فعلت لا تذكر أبدا كلمة ماء أو أي شيء آخر يتصل بالبحر، الموج، المد، المحيط، الهائج. حورية. سرعان ما فكرت بوقت وصول الصقيع في منتصف الصيف، من سباع أخبار الصيد، القوارب، الشباك وهياكل سرطان البحر. إنها تعرف أن مثل هذه الأشياء موجودة طبعا، وأن هناك أناس آخرون يمتلكون الشحنات قريبا هنالك. تعتقد الحورية أنها إذا غطت أذنيها وبعدت رأسها فإنها ستكون متحررة منهم، ولن تسمع صخب صوت كلب البحر أو حصان الماء. إذا صاحب وهو يدعي أنه يرتبط معها بعلاقة دم في ليال حالكة، فتنهار مثل الوزة وتتعرض خجلا وتنام بسرعة. الآن لا تكره شيئا بقدر ما تكره ما يذكرها بالحياة تحت الماء التي أرغمت عليها قبل أن تصبح ورقة جديدة فوق اليابسة، وهي التي تتبرأ من أي صلة سابقة تربطها بها في أي وقت سابق. لم يكن لدي أي اهتمام بتلك الأساطير القديمة أو التقاليد البالية. الهواء النقي، المعرفة، العلم المشرق الساطع، تلك فقط كل ما أتشبث به. أنا لا أمانع بطريقة أو بأخرى، لكنني اكتشفتها بالخداع. وجدتها في الخارج في قسم الفنون الشعبية الإيرلندية في كلية جامعة دوبلين. هناك مخطوطة كاملة في قسم مجموعة المدارس، والتي قد كانت أودعتها هي هناك. كتبت تحت الماء مع زعانف من شعاع القلم على لفيفة طويلة من عشب البحر، ويمكن أن تعثر على 13 حكايات طويلة واحتمالات ونهايات أخرى جنبا إلى جنب مع الساحرات، الصلوات القديمة وغيرها من والدها وجدتها. إنها في الغالب أخذتهم إلى الأسفل. إنها ترفض أن تتقبل وجودها، وعندما تفعل كان السيد الذي يعطيها إياها كواجبات منزلية في طريق العودة من المدرسة الوطنية، ونحن نقوم بها. وقالت أنها تفضل أن تعاني من نزيف شديد بدلاً من الاعتراف بأنها تمتلك يداً في تكوينها.
Thank you, Asma. Would you like to say a few words about the process of translating into Arabic?
Yeah, at the beginning it was very challenging for me and my colleagues Awatif, because there is many allusion to Irish culture and traditions. So it's very challenging, but the themes of these beautiful poems, it's resonate with Arabic readers because due to the experience of colonization of Palestine land.
Very good, and I know that we'll come back and discuss maybe some of the smaller points or language or so forth later on, but I should just mention that I presented these poems to a group of MA students I have here in Galway, and one student from Kuwait was really taken and delighted to read the poems in Arabic and felt that they were very accomplished translations. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
We'll move on to the German translation. If we I know Arndt Wigger had some problems connecting with us, so if Arndt is there now, we'll listen to the German translation.
Das Meerweib im Spital. Sie erwachte und ihr Fischschwanz war nicht mehr da. Aber im Bett bei ihr die zwei langen, kalten Dinger. Man möchte meinen, es seien Schiffstaue oder Fleischstücke. Das soll ein Scherz sein, bestimmt, am Fress- und Saufabend. Die halbe Belegschaft hier ist verrückt vom Trinken und die andere Hälfte sehr zu Späßen aufgelegt. Wie auch immer, das ist jetzt genug, sagte sie und warf die beiden Dinger aus dem Zimmer hinaus. Aber dies ist der Teil, den sie nicht versteht. Wieso sie hinter ihnen herfiel, Hals über Kopf. Was hatten die beiden Dinger mit ihr zu tun? Oder was hatte sie mit denen zu tun? Die Pflegerin gab ihr den Hinweis und führte sie der Erkenntnis zu. Dies ist ein Bein an dich gebunden und noch eins hier unter dir. Ein Bein, noch ein Bein. 1, 2. Du musst lernen, mit ihnen zu gehen. In den langen Monaten, die folgten, weiß man nicht, ob ihr Herz fiel, so wie die Fußsohle sie drückte, ihre Fersen. Should I on? That's fine. Don't know. Is it wrong or right? You never know in translating. You know, it's a dicey subject. Some people say that it's virtually impossible to properly translate, you know, if you take it seriously and make a scientific approach, you know, covering all levels and possible aspects of language, and 2 languages in this case, or 3 even in this particularly complicated setup here. But then on the other hand, there are lots of people who don't seem to care much about it. They love translating, and they produce a lot of text all the time, you see, without giving much thought to the theoretical problems in the background. But anyway, we can't discuss this complicated theoretical aspect of translating in general. I mean, I personally tend to focus on the difficulties and the near impossibilities of translating. But at the same time, I love it. I love doing it. And I'm happy to say that I did quite a lot. I mean, not that much, but anyway, some translating from Irish directly into German over the years. Mostly folklore stuff, you know, oral literature recorded in Connemara and transcribed meticulously and then translated partially, which occasionally caused serious difficulties. But on the other hand, you know, there are always ways around difficulties, and you can leave it to the readers to criticize your choice, or else discuss, of course, the possibilities. You know, you can have serious debates with colleagues, you know, on this version or that. I did not engage in any such discussions in translating this particular poem, these mermaid poems. Translating poetry as opposed to prose, and I love prose. I'm very fond of stories. In translating poetry, of course, the problems are exacerbated seriously. You know, I mean, you have to consider the aesthetic qualities, the music, rhythm, and all sorts of sometimes very seriously regulated formal aspects of the text, you know, which cause a major obstacle in translating or transposing into another language, if at all possible, you see. And but when you offered me this this job, and I thank you again for drawing me into Aistriú, I thought, oh my God, this is a lovely topic. Mhúruch, Maidin Mara is the same Conmara. Mehr Jungfrauen, I don't know, mehr Weiber I chose in German. I don't know whether do they have to be females at all. Well, that's a different little aspect of the problem. But it fascinated me because I've always thought about this extraordinary phenomenon of these creatures under the surface of the sea, and Michael Cronin has just added to this dimension of the topic. And so, okay, I'll do it, I'll try. And I found out then that Nuala's poems on these topics are rather like little stories, you know. It's not saying that they're not poems. They are certainly poems by any means, but you can't actually, you know, unless you miss this point or that point, read them like little stories and translate them accordingly. And that's what I'm going to try to do. And as I said before, directly from the original. Because of course, you know, the step over from one language to another one, and then from that is a great problem. It causes is a very rich source of mistakes and errors. And I'm not saying that Paul Muldoon's English versions are bad, not at all. They're lovely to read. But in my translation now, I found small, little details, situations where, when I later on looked at Paul's version, I thought, oh my God, what's wrong here? With me, first of all, or with him, I don't know. At least, I mean, it shows there are always ambiguities and choices to be made. And you cannot judge, you know, if this one is wrong, or that one is right, or the other way around. And still, I found, for example, that it was, just to give you one little, I don't want to take up too much time, one little example. It says somewhere, there's something about Idzo in Polish. The nurse draws the mermaid Idzo in Polish in the direction of knowledge. And I said even more pompously, führt sie der Erkenntnis zu. It's a real big revelation there, you know. Idzo in Polish. Whereas Paul says, she told her what it was all about. So again, totally different approach to this little detail, or the other one, just another one now. In the end, the nurse tells the mermaid what these lumps of flesh can actually do for her. And And that's what it says in Paul's version, what they do. She told her what to do with them. But in the original, it says explicitly what to do with them. Schul. So you have to say walk with them, you know, not just. You may found these little details, but then it shows, you know, that there are always choices to be made, and Paul must have good reasons to write what he wrote, but I will stick to my own choice. A bit nervous about this technical detail. I still can't see myself there, but then I'm not such a great sight anyway. Yes.
No, haber sin. At Arndt.
Age of 18. I was, I'll be 18 next year. And just a little detail. Of course, we all know that this story about the mermaids is just, stands for a big human issue, historically and sociologically, politically, and so on. Emigration, acculturation, integration, and all the rest of it, of which we read daily on any newspaper, lots of details or general accounts and so on. And the pains, of course, connected with it. And it doesn't matter what the reason for this change of life and habitat and so on were. But 50 years ago, when I lived in Dublin for a couple of years, I felt the same, you know, very, very, on a very low level, of course, you know, compared to the mermaid, what she had to go through, or many real victims of political turmoil and so on. But even there, on this very small personal level, I felt I had to change, or I felt I had changed in some minor ways, and adapted myself to this cosmos of South Dublin in the 70s, you see. And going back to Germany then again, it was a bit, you know, again, just to show that everybody can go through experiences of this kind, even if they may not be at all harmful at all, you see. Okay, that's all I'm for. Thank you.
Thank you, and Katharina Moiga. And
And
I know we're joined here by some German speakers and some Irish German speakers, as in speakers of both languages. So again, we might have a further discussion later on. But I'll move now to Magdalena Kleszczewska, who is going to read her Polish translation and again just say a few words about that process.
Good evening, everyone. Here is my attempt at translating this poem. Syrena w szpitalu. Kiedy się obudziła, odkryła, że jej rybi ogon zniknął bez śladu, ale w łóżku leżały dwa długie, zimne cyndzle. Wyglądały jak pasma glonów lub kawałki szynki. Jak nic, robią sobie jaja. W końcu jest Sylwester. Połowa personelu pijana jak bela. Procenty ścięły ich z nóg. A druga połowa stroi sobie żarty. Jakby nie było, to już jest przegięcie. Z tą myślą prasnęła dwoma cyndzlami ze drzwi. I właśnie tego nie może pojąć. Czemu za nimi poleciała i runęła dupą na łeb? Co ją łączyło z dwoma cyndzlami i jaki związek one miały z nią? Pielęgniarka mrugnęła do niej porozumiewawczo. Tu masz doczepioną jedną nogę, a z tej strony drugą. Dwa kolana, nogi dwie, wszystko pięknie zgadza się. Prawa nóżka, lewa nóżka, zacznij chodzić jak kaczuszka. Ciekawe, czy przez te długie miesiące, które potem nastały, jej serce się ugięło, podobnie jak łuk. Łuk jej podbicia. And now on to my reflections. I will try to be brief. So first of all, I would like to say why I have chosen this poem, this particular poem. to translate and to read tonight. And probably I could just quote Paul Muldoon, who said, I translate Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill poems for one very simple reason. I want to read them, and translation is the very closest form of reading of which we may avail ourselves. But this won't be exhaustive in my case. There are a couple of more reasons why I have translated this poem. First of all, it is one of my favorite poems by Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill, my beloved, I may say. Second of all, it hasn't been translated neither before the Aistriú project or after. So we have 2 volumes of Nuala's poems published here in Poland. One was published in 2012, translations by Jiří Jarniewicz, who also participated in Aistriú, and another volume was published in last year. The translations by Krystyna Dąbrowska. In the meantime, Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill received the Zbigniew Herbert International Award that was in 2018. So actually Polish readers demanded more poems by her to be translated into Polish, because in the volume of translations by Jiří Jarniewicz, there were only 60 poems by Nuala, 18 poems by Nuala, and only 2 from the 50-Minute Mermaid. Whereas in the last year's collection, we have 60 poems and 15 poems from the 50-Minute Mermaids. As I said, in neither of these volumes, there is the mermaid in the hospital, and I don't know why. None of the translations has chosen this poem. Maybe I will get back to it later. The third reason I have chosen this poem is that I like the story behind it. It is told by Nuala herself in a brilliant essay, Keleshtu, and also in this essay there is another translation or probably I may say adaptation of the poem by Mhúruch, and the translation by me is very different from Paul Muldoon's translation. Even the title itself is the mermaid in the labor ward. So as you can see, that's why I'm talking about adaptation here. Well, now the story behind the poem. Nuala describes that she was reading a story by Oliver Sacks in his book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, about someone who had severe brain lesion that left him unable to recognize parts of his body as his own. And then he woke up in a hospital with a strange leg. So I really like this story and how it evolved into a poem. And last but not least, I think I feel a kind of affinity with the mermaid from this poem particularly. Be it Muldoon's mermaid in the hospital or Mhúruch's mermaid in the labor ward. I'm a mother myself, so I can also feel like this mermaid. But what Paul Muldoon says, and I will quote him once again, that these poems feature merfolk who are at odds with themselves, psychologically as much as physically, in their dry land existences, and are trying to make sense of their own translated lives. And so I may say I feel the same. Now, another thing is that I have made 2 translations of this poem, and for the sake of this event tonight, I will call them pre-Irish, which means before my adventure with Irish language, before taking up the Irish language course. And this is the translation published on the website. And there is this post-Irish translation published in this collection, this wonderful collection. And with the second translation, I should probably add the translator's note saying, "Reader, I have taken liberties," because indeed I have. Now, but to quote here Gerard McLaughlin, sorry, I cannot pronounce it properly, he warns that English translations are a reality, and each Irish language writer must approach them cautiously, for they often gain an autonomy of their own and eclipse the Irish. So myself, well, I as a translator approached the English translation cautiously, and I decided to revise my first translation and to look into the Irish original. Because the problem I had, and I mentioned it in my reflection in the collection, is that when translating the poem, I couldn't read it aloud. Well, I could read Muldoon's translation because I know English, but I couldn't read the original. And I didn't know, and I also mentioned it, I didn't know how to pace the translation, my rendition of this poem. So this was one of the problems, and that's why I decided to revise the translation, and it became more of an adaptation, definitely different translation to the one that is published on the website. And this was quite a painstaking process for me, the revising, knowing a little bit of Irish. But I would like to look at three aspects of this here, just to be brief. First thing was Thingamis, the word Thingamis. This appears in Paul Muldoon's translation. I think it's just a bit, well, in Irish, it's just Narut, which is not so colloquial, maybe. While in Polish, I decided to use the colloquial word zinzla, which is rarely used, and I like the sound of it, and I like the word itself. So this would be the first aspect. But the second aspect is the, I think already quoted here, passage Focail Ahon Ado. And when I relied only on Paul Muldoon's translation, I didn't know, well, I didn't spot the rhyme, and I didn't know actually it was a nursery rhyme. And only after taking my Irish language course, it was like first or second lesson, we actually had this nursery rhyme. And I thought, oh God, so this is how you, well, you are introduced into Irish language, like a child. And then the idea came to me that I could put some Polish nursery rhyme in this place. Something about body parts, about legs. And I was just, you know, browsing on YouTube, looking for some, like, you know, Polish songs or something like that. And finally, I got something. I got something very nice. But I think I might have overdid it a little bit. But again, as I said, I have taken liberties. Another thing is the macaronic construction Cox and Bowhead. In Muldoon's translation, it is arse over tip. And in my first rendition, it was delicate, well, quite delicate. But when I revised the translation, I decided to be less delicate and also maybe render the kind of attempt to render the macaronic construction. And what I put is Dupont Naweb, which is like, you know, arse on head, but head, we like, you know, colloquial word for head. Now, when you read it, you can read it the French way. So you can read Dupont Naweb, because many people in Poland who want to sound like, you know, more posh, they attempt French, you know, French speech, so to say. So this was my idea here, and I left it there. And yeah, and Cox, like, you know, well, Irish, well, English word actually for male genital. I put it somewhere else because this is what you can do when translating. You can move. You can well, when you cannot do something in this line, you may, you know, overcompensate in another line. So in my translation, taking the piece and playing pranks is robić sobie jaja. Jaja means like, you know, genitals, cock actually in Polish, but it's also robić sobie jaja means thanks. So it's still there in my poem, the cock, sorry to say that, but it is there in a way. And just to put it to a close, I think that, well, although not all the original richness could be reproduced with me, you know, going into the Irish original, not all is lost, I believe. And I want to say here one thing. I think the Polish language deserves translations of Nuala's poems directly from the Irish. So there were three translators into Polish taking part in this project. One was Jerzy Jarniewicz, another was Barbara Schott, and then me. And I think I could, like, you know, locate myself somewhere between Jerzy Jarniewicz, who translated from English, and between Barbara, who translated from Irish. I was somewhere in between because I tried to translate from both. Now, Polish deserves translations from Irish because there's a new generation of Irish poets, women poets, who write in Irish. And I'm thinking of Doreen Nichrifa, who translates her own poems, and Afrik Makaya, for example. And I think that, well, Doreen would be translated this year or next year into Polish. And I think that the poems, which are originally in Irish, should be translated from Irish, not via English. And with this, I'm coming back to what I was supposed to talk about English being a mediating language. It should no longer be the mediating language. There should not be, you know, need for this. Translators should translate from the Irish. And the final thing is that I would like to thank you all for inviting me to take part in this project, for the cooperation. And I would like to thank Barbara Schott, who is not here, who hasn't joined us here tonight, but she thanked me well, she said my rendition helped her in her translation. And I would like to thank Jerzy Jarniewicz for being my mentor and my continuous inspiration in the world of literary translation and Irish literature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Magdalena. I think you know, combined those contributions from each of the translators, it shows the attention to detail and the commitment. And I'm sure, as I said, that there are questions there, or small details, or the bigger questions of Brid languages that we might come back to. But we'll move on to the next poem, which is Cuimhne an Uisce, a recovered memory of water. And we're going to hear one translator respond to that. Jorge Duran will read his Galician version of the poem, and then he'll speak a little bit because Jorge translated both into Galician and into Spanish. But I'll ask Ailbhe and John to read the Irish and the English first, and then we'll go over to you, Jorge.
Cuimhne an Uisce. Uaireanta nuair a bhí na hinianta seomar folca, glanna fiacla le sléad, tuv agus le sód bácála. Tictar de go líanaan an seomra suas le huisce. Tá sníonn sé ag a cosa is a rútíní, is bíonn sé ag slibreáil suas, is suas ríis, thar a másaí, is a cramáin, is a básta. Ní fada go mbíonn sé suas go dtí na hoscadaíortha. Cromin sias ann go minic ag piocadh suas rudaí mar thuáilí láimhe nó curtacha tar muas ann. Tá cumann na feamaníortha, na scothóga fada celpa úd a dogadíist grúig bhaiden mhara nó erbal vadrí rua ortha. An son go hoban téan an tuisce in níisc, is ní fada go mbíonn an seomra omláin trim a ríis. Tá strus ó bhásach a roinnt na mhúcháin seo go léir. Tréis a tíl, níl rudidir bithice chun comparáidí anamh leis. Is níl na focail chearta ar ólasacha ar chorbe. Ag is seisiún si go heiripach seachta nuail, bí na dóthan dua ice I ddírig an scéal aisteach se a bhí nu, is é a chur aniu le gart don bheabharach túir. Ní léon termíochtacha, ná tearmí tagartha, ná focail ar bith a thuaireach an túra mislú do Cadé Uisce. Lacht tréhearcach a deir si, I déanamh a crín díthil. Se a deireann an therapy, cuine bhirt. Bíonn sé á molla is á gríosú chun gníomh tangan. Duineann si iarracht eile. Sléad tannaí a thugann siad, I ag tóiríocht go cuaireamach a measc na Focail. Brat dléanach, ábhar siúlteach, rud fluch.
A recovered memory of water, translated into English by Paul Muldoon. Sometimes when the mermaid's daughter is in the bathroom, cleaning her teeth with a thick brush and baking soda, she has the sense the room is filling with water. It starts at her feet and ankles and slides further and further up over her thighs and hips and waist. In no time, it's up to her oxters. She bends down into it to pick up hand towels and washcloths and all such things as are sodden with it. They all look like seaweed, like those long strands of kelp that used to be called mermaid hair or foxtail. Just as suddenly, the water recedes, and in no time, the room's completely dry again. A terrible sense of stress is part and parcel of these emotions. At the end of the day, she has nothing else to compare it to. She doesn't have the vocabulary for any of it. At her weekly therapy session, she has more than enough to be going on with just to describe this strange phenomenon and to express it properly to the psychiatrist. She doesn't have the terminology or any of the points of reference or any word at all that would give the slightest suggestion as to what water might be. A transparent liquid, she says, doing as best she can. Right, says the therapist, keep going. He coaxes and cajoles her towards word making. She has another run at it. A thin flow, she calls it, casting about gingerly in the midst of words. A shiny film, dripping stuff, something wet.
A recovered memory of water in Arabic translation. استعادة ذاكرة الماء في بعض الأحيان عندما تكون ابنة حورية البحر في الحمام تنظف أسنانها بصودا الخبز كربونات الصوديوم تشعر بأن الغرفة تمتلئ بالماء يبدأ عند قدميها وكاحليها ثم ساقيها وركبتيها حتى يصل فوق فخذيها وخصرها في غضون ثوان يصل الماء إلى إبطيها فعندما تنحني لتلتقط منشفة اليد أو منشفة الغسيل وكل الأشياء المبللة تشعر وكأنها كلها تشبه الأعشاب البحرية الطويلة وخيوطا طويلة تدعى شعور الحرية أو فوكسفيل لكن فجأة يتراجع الماء وفي غضون ثوان تعود الغرفة جافة تماما شعور بغيض يعطي التوتر هذا الشعور الرهيب بالتعب ما هو إلا جزء لا يتجزأ من مشاعرها في نهاية اليوم ليس لديها أي شيء آخر لتقارنه بتلك المشاعر ليس لديها مفردات تصف مشاعرها في جلسة علاجها الأسبوعية لديها أكثر مما يكفي لتستمر فقط في وصف هذه الظاهرة الغريبة والتعبير عنها بشكل صحيح لطبيبها النفسي ليس لديها مصطلحات أو أي من النقاط المرجعية أو أي كلمة على الإطلاق تعطي أدنى فكرة عن ماهية الماء بالنسبة لها السائل الشفاف كما تصفه عندما تصفه بكل ما في وسعها صحيح قال لها الطبيب وتابع أكملي يوجهها لتستطيع صنع الكلمات المناسبة لديها جولة أخرى في هذا تدفق رقيق هكذا أسمته هذه المرة يلقي بالشغف بين الكلمات في الملامع أشياء تقطر شيء مبلل.
Thank you, Awatif. And Jorge.
O recordo recuperado do que é a auga. Algunhas veces, mentres a filla da serea está no baño, cepillando os dentes, ela ten a sensación de que o cuarto vai pouco a pouco enchéndose de auga. Comeza polos pés, despois os nocellos, ata ir subindo máis e máis polas coxas, a cadeira, a cintura, e antes de que poida reaccionar, xa lle cubre polo pescozo. Inclínase para recoller do chan toallas e farrapos anegados. Parecen algas, longos fíos de argazo varado na praia. Tan rápido como retrocede a auga, o cuarto xa está completamente enxoito outra vez. Unha sensación terrorífica que xa é parte dos paquetes de emocións humanas. Nunca antes experimentara nada comparable. Non adquiriu vocabulario suficiente nin axeitado para poder describir o que lle pasa. E na súa sesión semanal de terapia xa ten dabondo do que falar como para preocuparse de como contarlle a psiquiatra estes fenómenos extraños. Non coñece terminoloxía nin ten puntos de referencia para axudarse. Tampouco sabe que palabras que puidesen suxerir o que é a auga. É un líquido transparente, di ela explicándose, con tanta certeza como pode. Ben, di a terapeuta, continúa. Ela proba de novo. Un corpo resplandecente, di, achegándose cautelosamente a metade da definición. Unha capa finísima, que gotea, algo húmido. First, I would like to thank everyone involved in the project. And I was very excited to propose to you my translation into Galician and Spanish, because similarly, I think, and this is what I try to do with my translations, to what the Irish version and the English translation do. This is what I try to do with both Spanish and Galician, to try to use them as counterpoints for two different experiences within the same country, within the same kind of general culture, but then you realize that there's this small changes that defy one or the other. As I said in the small note that I had to do for the book, I mainly base my translation in the English version. However, an interesting thing, and this is why I was very, very excited to get the Galician versions approved, not only for the project, but for the book as well, is that for the Galician versions, I found some things that didn't work as well in my first version. So I had to go to Irish-speaking friends that would guide me through the Irish versions and find some kind of a structure sometimes, so cultural references to the sea that I found closer to Galician culture than to the general Spanish one. Also, all this issue of leaving a language behind, you know, not knowing how to respond, how to deal with describing a reality that is yours, and then that suddenly changes and you don't know how to do that. This was very current in modern and contemporary Spanish history. Many people here in Galicia moved from the coast, and they were like fishermen, and women were the main supporters of the family and work closely in ports, and then had to move to the cities because poverty. And then they had to live behind Galicia, and some of them had to move to Madrid, Barcelona, even to other parts of Europe or South America. Were known in Argentina. Those immigrants from Spain were called Galicians, Gallegos, because so many of them had to leave a language behind, and then explain to the daughters, like in the poem, a situation that was happening, but that's not happening anymore. But then you still have to deal with that in some kind of way. This was very exciting to do. Thank you for the project, because I was able to reflect deeper into that. And I don't want to take up more time, because I think it's more important to listen to the poems and then have a longer discussion at the end that just listen to me talk about different points. But again, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the Galician translation. And later on, you might see some differences with this, how the Spanish rhythm and cadence goes.
Thank you, Jorge. And I know that you're going to read in Spanish for us in a second, a different poem. And just to point out, just as you mentioned it there, I know our French translators also felt that this was a wonderful opportunity for them to return to their coastal roots, and that's how they've mentioned it in Brittany and Normandy, to think about words that they perhaps themselves wouldn't use in everyday discourse, but an older generation would, and those who still work, of course, on the coasts and in the sea. So I think there are resonances there that that you're picking up on. And so we're going to speak about the second last poem, which is Leide, a tiny clue. And I know Ailbhe and John are going to read it, and then Focail is going to read it in Spanish as well.
Leide Beag. Tá gafa fad de bharthanna láin ne cúléisteacht leis a Mhurúch. Beidir go bhaidh fá Leide Beag an seochas an siúd cardavaste. Hánasa in iad dúigirthe lá fóir is a ní ná ná bréaga féin na seálacha. Ní tú éan gordam na mariseach, ní tú garcocht las na gweabach, ní tú cuileán a vada isce, ní tú lé na muile cuile, man súan trí a bhí á chanaice. Ach de stop sí suas láthirach baum, cho lua is a hig sí duine eile a bheithre burt. Tuigech dom gur ghlach sí náire a dé a bheith cloiste go an áchar. Tuigech dom choma go raibh blas anna láidir den bharige mar thuan trí a géad scór.
A tiny clue, translated into English by Paul Muldoon. You could spend your entire life eavesdropping on the mermaid before you'd pick up the tiniest little clue about where she was really from. One autumn day, I happened upon her and her child while she was comforting it under her shawl. You are not the blue-green pup of the seal. You are not the grey chick of the greater black-backed gull. You are not the kit of the otter, nor are you the calf of the slender hornless cow. This was the lullaby she was singing, but she stopped short immediately she realized someone else was in the neighborhood. I had the distinct sense she was embarrassed I'd overheard her in the first place. I also came away with the impression the lullaby was, to put it mildly, redolent of the sea.
Un pequeño indicio. Tendrías que pasar toda la vida escuchando a escondidas para descubrir siquiera un pequeño indicio sobre el origen de la sirena. Un día de otoño la encontré con su bebé bajo el chal. No eres un bebé foca azulado, no eres un pollito gris de gaviota, no eres una cría de nutria, ni tampoco una ballena recién nacida. Esta era la nana que le cantaba y que dejó de cantar cuando se dio cuenta de que había alguien cerca. Yo tuve la sensación de que sentía vergüenza de que la hubiese escuchado y seguí mi camino con la impresión de que aquella canción era el último residuo de su vida anterior, un fuerte sabor a mar.
And we're also going to hear that in Portuguese. I think Maria is going to read it to us in Portuguese, and then followed by Philomena, who's going to speak a little bit about the translation process into Portuguese.
Hello, good evening. I'll read the poem. Hi. The title is Uma Pequena Pista. Poderias passar a vida inteira a escutar a sereia sem encontrares uma única pista sobre a sua verdadeira origem. Um dia de outono, encontrei-a por acaso, a ela e ao seu rebento, enquanto o confortava debaixo de Fhrighil. Tu não és a cria verde azulada da foca. Tu não és o pintainho cinzento do gaivotão real. Tu não és o bebê da lontra, nem és o bezerro da esbelta vaca sem chifres. Era esta a canção de embalar que cantava, mas de súbito parou, assim que percebeu que estava mais alguém por perto. Tive a nítida sensação de que sentiu vergonha, sobretudo de eu a ter ouvido. Também fiquei com a impressão de que a canção, no mínimo, emanava fragrâncias a mar.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for this great opportunity to listen to these wonderful poems in so many languages. I hope Nuala is enjoying this, because it's like you've written this 20 times over. At least this is how I feel, even if I don't understand many of the languages. This exercise, this translation here that Maria Amélia Carvalho has just read, was translated by our students. So this was the work of literary translation class in a translation course, not an Irish literature class. So these students had no knowledge of Irish literature or the language, but they approached the task seriously and with great enthusiasm. These poems rose lots of questions and made us think of our common heritage, especially of diasporic nature, how everybody lives. George just mentioned the exodus of Galicians, first closer to Portugal, then across the ocean. And we, the Portuguese, have also this experience of being transplanted and also of having transplanted other people. The other point, so that was a point of identification. The other point was the point of strangeness. This was all very familiar, although mermaids don't usually go about in our streets, we think. The other point was that metaphors, imagery, artifacts related to fishing, seafaring was, I assumed, a person in her 60s, I assumed was popular common language, but it's not. I'm just deluding myself. The young generation of my soon-to-be and now translators had no recollection of fishing life. We have had a huge industry of fish canning, conserving fish. We had the White Fleet during the Second World War that went all to Newfoundland to fish cod, and they still do. But none of this vocabulary was germane to my students or indeed to myself. And so this was another discovery that was so important for our study. Dig up, discover vocabulary that had been lost in our common practice and elocution and even reading. Then about the translation itself, there are always problems. These translations were made by students, revised by myself and Amelia, corrected, and then given out to an experienced outside translator for reviewing. And still, when I received this wonderful book, I showed it proudly to my son. And he read a tiny clue, and he said, "Mom, there's a mistake there." And he is a cook by profession. And I thought, how so? Well, you have a sequence of 3 water animals, and you end up with a cow. This cow is the odd one out. And then, of course, as none of us had Irish, I started feeling this strangeness of the hornless, the slender hornless cow. And I looked for help in Irish because we only followed Paul Muldoon's text. And sometimes in class we wondered, what did the lady say really? But we stuck to our assignment. And now I'm happy, although to be found wrong in some way, I'm happy that Jorge found a sea creature for this final line. So it's not a cow from anywhere, it's a whale or a whale, the small of a whale. And I think that I would be happier with this, but this entails another reading of the poem, because the lullaby is telling the mother is telling the child that you are not this, you are that. Are you not a sea creature? Or are you neither a sea creature or a land-walking creature? So it's a separation, a total assimilation, or the reprieve, the attempt to get hold of, to get some sense of ambivalent existence, ambivalent identity, because you are neither a water animal, You are neither a garden bird. Paul Muldoon made it a seabird. You are something else. So instead to recover my dignity here on family ground, I say that whichever way we do it, if we keep the legged memo in the translation, we are finding a much narrower space for assimilation and for identity. If we take on all the sea animals, then we find that the mermaid is telling her child, leave that behind. We are now destined to live on dry soil with legs, and that's what it's going to be. So in this problem that I always found a bit difficult, because it was difficult to translate slender hornless cow, and then to be confronted, Mom, can't you see the odd one out? That is plain wrong. I have an eye for detail. Just made me look for an escape route into self-respect. And I think there is an argument here for a balanced reading of those translations who chose a mammal herbivore, and for those translations that stuck to only water animals. So with this ambivalence, I end my comments, and I still thank everybody in Aistriú and in EFACIS for making this possible.
Thank you, Philomena, and I can tell you that myself and John are sighing relief, because when we thought you had spotted a mistake after all the work, I think we were quite worried there. I could see John's face on Zoom. So thankfully it's about interpretation, perhaps. We're coming to our final poem, and we've already heard it in Arabic on Mhúruch agus Focail, the mermaid in certain words, and we'll hear it now in Greek, first of all by Ailbhe and John in Irish and English, and then Natasha Raimondo will give it to us in Greek and speak about her process.
An Mhúruch agus Focail ná luig an Focail Uisce lethe, nó éan ní a bhaineann le cuasaí farige, town, Leide, Cuimhne, Mhúruch nó Sáile. Ní lú lethe an siúc saoirigh ná tráchtachlas iascach, báid, saoní trá nó tramala, potaigh leach. Tasca go maith go bhfuil le héadí ann, is go mbíonn giatáil éigean a bhainnis leo siúla go daoine eile. Ceapann sí má rúnan tíoch luasa a tluasa is má chasanna ceann go mbeidh sí séir orthe. Is ná cloisigh sí búr rúr an éigisce ag fógart gail hiarí lethe go dainn san oíche. Ag chur gráníní ar a cricin is brat alais amach trí lár a colla irthe. Ní léon naid eileice ach an saoil fahín a chlecht sí, saoir untaigh sí ar a hathéal ar níntír a chur roineige. Síanann sí ó bhain go raibh irid is cach snuga de bhainteacha leis an am. Ní ra bheith an tíim riamh agam sna pisóga sin, ná an éon sort sean aimsreachta. Éir, ólas, solas léanach na hólaíochta is se hantíosa. Ba chumilm ach go bhfuair samach san éithechaí. Is stig sa rain le béalad is éireann tá lámhscríonn omláin de bhailiúcháin na scoil bracha óna láimh. Scríte in Uisce le clippe de scíán rotha scothóg feamana mar fár. Tá 310 de scéalta fada agus matíocha de chin eile I damhta le thorthaí se na fadracha, tóisina agus a riile le tuairt fenara ann. Ó na hathair is ó na máthair Rióna is mó a thug sí siasiad. Dúiltíonn siad landa. An máiste a thug mar aber bhailiúghine fadó hir sa bhunscoil. Chaimear é dhéanamh, níor bhéan do lascain. Cháthach sé fuil thróine, sár meach sí riamh a bhálach an hiúscanamh.
The Mermaid and Certain Words, translated into English by Paul Muldoon. Whatever you do, don't ever mention the word water or anything else that smacks of the sea, wave, tide, ocean, the raging main, the briny. She'd as soon contemplate the arrival of frost in the middle of summer than hear tell of fishing, boats, seine or trammel nets, lobster pots. She knows that such things exist, of course, and that other people have truck with them. She thinks that if she covers over her ears and turns away her head, she'll be free of them, and she'll never hear again the loud neighing of the kelpie or water horse, claiming its blood relation with her at the darkest hour of night, causing her to break out in goose pimples and having sweat lashing off her while she's fast asleep. She hates nothing so much as being reminded of the underwater life that she led before she turned over a new leaf on dry land. She totally denies that she had the slightest connection with it at any time. I never had any interest in those old superstitions or any of the old traditions. Fresh air, knowledge, the shining brightness of science are all I have ever hankered after. I wouldn't mind one way or the other, but I myself have found her out in the deception. In the Department of Irish Folklore in University College Dublin, there's a whole manuscript in the school's collection that was set down by her, written in water with the fin of a ray for a pen on a long scroll of kelp. In it can be found 13 long tales and odds and ends of other ones, together with charms, old prayers, riddles and such. From her father and her grandmother, she mostly took them down. She refuses to accept its existence, and when she does, it was the master who gave it to us as homework way back in the national school. We had to do it. There was no getting out of it. She would prefer to suffer a heavy nosebleed rather than admit she ever had a hand in its composition.
An Mhúruch agus Focail ortha, the mermaid and certain words. Η γοργόνα και κάποιες λέξεις. Ό,τι και αν κάνεις, μην αναφέρεις ποτέ τη λέξη νερό ή οτιδήποτε άλλο θυμίζει θάλασσα, κύμα, παλήρια, ωκεανός, πέλαγος, αρμύρα. Θα προτιμούσε να φανταστεί την άφιξη του παγετού κατά μεσής του καλοκαιριού, παρά να ακούει για ψαρέματα, βάρκες, τράτες, ειδίχτια και αστακοδοχεία. Το ξέρει πως τέτοια πράγματα υπάρχουν φυσικά και πως άλλοι με τέτοια έχουν παρτίδες. Νομίζει πως αν κλείσει τα αυτιά της και γυρίσει το κεφάλι της αλλού, θα γλιτώσει από αυτά και δεν θα ξανακούσει ποτέ το δυνατό χλιμίντρισμα του υδρόβιου πνεύματος ή του υπόκαπου να διεκδικούν τη συγγένειά της εξαίματος την πιο σκοτεινή ώρα της νύχτας, προκαλώντας της ένα ξέσπασμα ανατριχύλας και τον υδρότα να τη μαστιγώνει όταν την παίρνει ο ύπνος. Τίποτα δεν μισεί πιο πολύ από το να της υπενθυμίζουν την υποβρύχια ζωή της πριν γυρίσει σελίδα σε στεγνή στεριά. Αρνείται στεναρά πως είχε την παραμικρή σχέση ποτέ με αυτήν. Ποτέ δεν με ενδιέφεραν εκείνες οι παλιές προκαταλήψεις ή οι παλιές παραδόσεις. Καθαρό αέρα, γνώση, τη λαμπερή ευφυΐα της επιστήμης ήταν τα μόνα που λαχτάρισα. Δεν θα με πείραζε ούτως ή άλλως, αλλά εγώ ίδια την αποκάλυψα πάνω στην απάτη. Στο τμήμα Ιρλανδικής Λαογραφίας, στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Δουβλίνου, υπάρχει ένα ολόκληρο χειρόγραφο στη συλλογή της σχολής, που καταγράφηκε από εκείνη, γραμμένο στο νερό, με σαλαχιού πτερίγιο για στυλογράφο, σε ένα μακρύ πάπυρο από κέλπιες. Μέσα εκεί βρίσκονται 13 μεγάλα παραμύθια και άλλα ψιλολόγια, μαζί με φυλαχτά, παλιές προσευχές, γρίφους και τέτοια. Από τον πατέρα της και τη γιαγιά της πιο πολύ τα κατέγραψε. Αρνείται να παραδεχθεί την ύπαρξή του. Και όταν το κάνει, ήταν ο δάσκαλος που μας το έδωσε εργασία για το σπίτι, πριν χρόνια στο δημοτικό. Έπρεπε να το κάνουμε. Θα προτιμούσε να υποστεί βαριά ρινοραγία, παρά να παραδεχτεί πως έβαλε το χέρι της στη σύνθεσή του. Thank you very much, Gormila Mahagod. I want to thank the organizers of tonight's event, EFACIS, and particularly Rióna and John, for making me part of this wonderful project. And above all, I would like to thank Nuala for the poetry, which whose poetry I encountered while I left my home like a fish out of the water to go abroad, more than actually almost 2 decades ago. And there I encountered Nuala's poetry while I was studying English and cultural politics. And then coming to Ireland, I delved further into her work. And I actually had also the unique honor of teaching her poetry to my students. And I would like to say that what fascinates me about Nuala's poetry is not just the specific mermaid poems, which I would like to say a few words about, but also the fact that she deals with the difficult questions in her poetry through her fidelity to the Irish language, which I read in translation. When she writes about poetry as a medium of writing with an R, she deals with the genocide in Srebrenica or with the Gulf War. That's something that I have come to appreciate immensely in Nuala's poetry. Before talking a bit about the issues of translation that I encountered, the mermaid poems for me are fascinating because of the cross-cultural references that resonate largely with my own mother tongue, the Greek language, and the symbolism, the trope of the mermaid itself. So for me, it was very refreshing finding out these poems and seeing how Nuala subverts this archetype of the mermaid, which conventionally, traditionally has been used by a genealogy of male writers, beginning from Hesiod to Homer, what we call the Western tradition, as this creature that is monstrous, but also alluring and beautiful, and occupying this kind of, there's nothing more unsettling than this kind of biform water creature that occupies the human, but also the non-human. And I find this so exciting in her work, but also the fact that the mermaid has to leave behind, as Jorge very eloquently expressed earlier, what she knows and unlearn her previous life and deny even, negate her previous life in order to walk on dry land. In terms of translation, I worked on several drafts. John knows that very well, because every now and again I would send him a new email. This is the final draft. This is the final draft. I had to, first of all, it was a process of me reclaiming my own relationship to my own language, to my native tongue, a language that's a home that I have left for half my life. So it was an interesting reclaiming of my relationship with my mother tongue, even though I do translate very often. I found that the fact that I had to translate through another translation was quite daunting for me, but with a little bit from my Irish friends, I also try to navigate, this instances where, idiomatic expressions might have been, a trap. So I think that was the big challenge, but also being attuned to the tonality, to the register of the language through the English language, and also to even punctuation. For example, in the first poem, Nuala uses a question mark, and Paul Muldoon uses the if clause, so there's a full stop. But in general, I think the most challenging aspect for me was to transfer, if so to speak, the rhythm of the poem, and also when reading it aloud to make sure that in Greek it made sense. It captured the essence of what Nuala is doing in her poetry, in this very deep poetry that deals with, on a psychoanalytic level, with the world of a woman. So for me, it was fascinating in terms of gender, in terms of specifically how Nuala discusses gender, women's writing in particular, and our expectations of differently formed bodies, of differently gendered bodies even. I found the attention to detail I had to be very attuned also to terminology that has to do with medical terms, but also the anatomy of the human body. I found fascinating that I was searching, the anatomy of the human foot and trying to make sure that everything is in place. But also the aquatic symbolism, which is, I was listening to Philomena discussing this intergenerational kind of discrepancy between, encountering the aquatic symbolism through the fishing industry and the fishing of older generations. It's something that is very prevalent in Greek culture. So there are a lot of words that were compound words that I had to also be careful with. But it was, all in all, it was a very enjoyable experience, and a task of love, like translation is, a gesture to the myopia of monolingualism that I think Nuala's work in poetry demonstrates in the most acute way. And thank you very much. That's all I had to say.
Natasha, that was a beautiful, I suppose, almost like a summary of some of what we've heard, that just attention to detail. I'm struck by the just how closely people have read the text, as Paul Muldoon himself said, translation is a form of close reading, and I think we've certainly heard that tonight. It was very enriching, I think, to hear the translations read aloud. And another thing that has struck me is the sense to which, and we don't often do this, I suppose, in academic discourse, that people have responded also in a personal capacity, and have made their links, and not just as translators, but also as humans, and those motifs and themes that touch people. And I guess that's why one of the reasons that Nuala's poems just very naturally, people gravitated to them for a reason. If there are questions, if people would like to either put it in the chat or raise your virtual hand, as is customary at these sort of, or just turn on your mic if someone would like to comment or to ask a question. Katharina.
Hello.
Yes, Nuala.
Yeah, I'm very mille mahagov. The galer as an upper universe. They say Dutch stretch that all is a gum narrative that come hana and the Dr. Thea Tagadine le monoculture. Just the fact that they're different was so important to so many people in so many different languages, and I'm so thankful to you all.
I think there's a lot of fans here in the audience, Nuala, and we certainly appreciate that feedback from you. And actually, just and then I'll come to Kathy. But I think, Nuala, I'd just like to read out this message from Io Cullian, who was with us earlier and had to leave. Gogorjahas le Nuala a hogdoing snadantasha severus sparan nakali mareva. In these poems, Nuala has given the entire world riches from a mermaid's purse, keys to that which is behind us and perhaps what lies ahead. Maciol to Nuala, fair play to everyone who read their translations this evening, to Ailbhe, the mermaid of Tralee, Rióna and John, and to Michael Cronin for his eloquent remarks. Gamari Shiver Fad. I think that's a lovely sentiment there from E. O'Cullian. Katharina, I know that you had your hand up there, I think.
Yeah, I'm not a translator myself, and hearing and learning about all the tricky decisions you have to take, and it was fascinating listening to all your translation processes. I was wondering, and that's a question to everyone, whoever wants to answer really, is it in the end the deadline which defines the end of your translation process? Or do you sometimes have the feeling that now that's it and your perfect version of Nuala's poem has now made it into the world?
If I may just say, for me, translation is never-ending process. You have a deadline because John said you have a deadline, or then you just send it. But you think constantly. You go over this translation on and on. That this is true for me, and well, I'm never happy with it. As I said today, this is one version. In this publication, I think I might have overdid something. But I'm not sure. It's not up to me to decide. Actually, this is kind of a work, and I give it to the world. And okay, you decide. I had to finish. I had to give it, but I'm never sure. And I think this is, well, you cannot be sure. Actually, if you want to translate, you have to have this hesitance within you. Yeah, thank you.
I really admire your the work you do. That's great. Thank you so much.
Following on my joke that a translation has a sell-by date, this does not apply to the original. And it's true that we are never wholly satisfied with the translation, but there are very nice people with fangs and claws called editors and publishers, and they tell you to get on with it and get the job done. So it is the best exercise by the given date. It's true. But let's believe that in many cases they are good proposals. I'm just happy to listen to all the ones that have been given here, and obviously I desperately need to learn Irish. That's bottom line of this. Okay, thank you.
And Philomena, I know that we are joined here tonight by some of your former students who participated and did this as part of their coursework, and I would just like to thank them as well. Myself and John know that in our dealings with them, they were so dedicated and enthusiastic, and that's wonderful to see. And clearly they had a great teacher and a leader in that sense. So thank you to those who have joined us, Hugo, and I know there's another Polish translator, Barbara, is with us tonight too.
Yes, Hugo asked me, told me just now that he's working from a computer that does not share image and sound, so he can write messages on chat, and he was brilliant, really. I'm very proud of them.
Wonderful, thank you. Were there any of the themes maybe that different translators touched on that any of the other translators would like to respond to, or any of those, those questions about the nursery rhyme or the hornless cow, or how people approached those sort of more difficult maybe or interpretations, as well as, I suppose, the literal translation? Jorge?
Yeah, regarding the what was Philomena was saying about the animals, that was to me a liberty I took kind of in the poem, due to exactly what she was explaining. I read the poem and I took them to heart as a kind of trauma of an older generation that sees that there's no way of turning back, there's no future for their offspring, and I chose exactly. I was having issues with that line because how would you translate that kind of animal, but at the same time keep the rhyme and the good structure for the poem, and I decided to change it into a baby whale, due to Galician culture. Exactly, this was an area that was very strong in terms of whale hunting until kind of recently, until we got rid of them all. Almost. I think sometimes there's the whale passing by, but most of them do not come across here anymore. So that was what I wanted to do with that poem, to choose precisely a baby whale, because it's something that was here for a long time and that we treat so badly that it disappeared. And this is kind of a thing that differs in the tone. For the Galician versions, it's kind of like a more nostalgic and sad ending, whether in the Spanish version I tried to kept it a little bit more distanced.
So I don't see, sorry, there's a, I'll just read this here. It's amazing to reconnect Irish to a wider European and even worldwide flow of languages. So refreshing to get out of the perpetual Irish-English sour binary. Even if we use it to discuss the poems, it has outgrown the dichotomy through this project. And I have a question for the Arabic translators, and this is Nemo, though I don't understand it. Did they find any similar sounds between the languages? It seems like there are some to unpracticed ears. So Asma or...
Yeah, I'm out of gun, but I'm here.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah, there is similar themes, as I said before, like forced displacement and post-colonial issues or struggles. For me, I didn't experience that, but for Palestinian people, as you know, they because they Arabic people, they experience this. And so the themes of post-colonial issue and the forced displacement, it's very resonate in our world.
Mm-hmm. And with regard sounds, I think did you, well, you were working from the English language bridge texts, yeah. And in regard to just, I suppose, because it's a related question, I suppose Nuala's poems are conversational in tone, maybe. Did you have, was there any difficulties in getting that register, or is that something that would be quite familiar to Arabic readers of poetry? Would they come across poetry that's in more conversational register, will say?
No, we have it, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not,
yeah.
Right.
It's familiar, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. I don't see, I'm just checking that I haven't missed anything here. Somebody just, yes, commenting on John's readings of the poem in his Irish accent. So thank you for that experience. I'm just very conscious that we've kept you here a while, and people are probably tired. And I'm also aware, of course, that those of you in Central Europe are an hour ahead of us. So it's now coming up to almost 9 o'clock. And I just want to thank you again for a very inspiring and a very enriching conversation. We don't have many opportunities like this generally, and I really want to thank you for your dedication. So really all that's left to me now is I will just say a few thank yous before I hand over to Katharina for the final word. I'd like to thank Professor Michael Cronin for his very reflective and perceptive comments on the Multilingual Mermaid and on the process of translation. Go buíochas ó chrí le Ailbhe Ní Ghearbhuigh agus le John Caulfield le na Dánta sin le Brí agus le Honam. I'd like to thank, of course, our translators who joined us tonight and those who contributed to the volume itself. Tonight we were joined by Awatif, Asma, Arndt Wigger, Magdalena, Jorge, Philomena and Maria and Natasha. So thank you so much. Of course, we're indebted to EFACIS, especially to Katharina Rennhak, to Hedwig Schwal, who advised us on how to carry this out, and to Sean, who has given us so much support and technical support. Literature Ireland and Sinead Maché, Galway 2020, of course, my colleagues in Ollscoil na Gaillimhe in the University of Galway, the Gallery Press, and last but of course by no means least, Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill herself, whose work continues to attract and to inspire readers and translators and scholars in a global context, and we're very proud of that. Gur fada buanhu and Nuala, and I'll hand back over to you, Katharina.
Thank you, and I can only join you in the thank you final words. Thanks to Michael for his wonderful introduction. Thank you, Arndt, Asma, Awatif, Fhrighil, Magdalena, Natasha, Maria, and Philomena for your beautiful versions of and thoughts on Nuala's mermaid poems. Thank you, Ailbhe, for your mesmerizing readings. And thank you, John and Rióna, for having made all this possible. Last but certainly not least, of course, thank you so much, Nuala, for enriching and changing our world by introducing us to the realm of the mermaids. It's a great honor that you joined us here tonight. Before you all go, I'm happy to announce that the next EFACIS Roundtable promises to continue some aspects of tonight's discussion, as it will engage with Irish and Irish-English linguistics, interfaces, and synergies. This next EFACIS Roundtable is organized by the Irish-English Network and will take place on the 15th of February next year. And it will be lovely to see many of you again. An earlier opportunity, because February is still quite far away, so an earlier opportunity to meet up with EFACIS members and our community again is our next EFACIS book club meeting, which will be moderated by Chris Cusack, who invites us to discuss Deirdre Sullivan's Savage Her Reply, published in 2020, and Deirdre herself will also join us for this book club session in 2 weeks' time on the 14th of December. Thank you all again, and see you soon, and have a good night.